you, José-Marie, for making the effort of coming here all the way from South Dakota just for us.
Because you like the weather.
Oh, I love the weather, yes. You made me feel at home. It's like London here.
José-Marie, you said that AI is beginning to transfer every aspect of human life. What do you mean with that?
Well, I think if we think about artificial intelligence applications, they're already impacting every aspect of our life, and the potential is that they will increase in intensity, and more of all the interactions we have with each other, with organizations, with technology will be driven by some form of artificial intelligence. We can look at what's happening in healthcare that's being transformed by artificial intelligence, from searching massive data sets to delivering expert care across vast rural areas. Education, we have the potential to change education. I think there's still a role always for the teacher. As an academic, I have to say that. But I think the technology can help enhance the learning for people, and especially people with different learning styles. They're just everything. Transportation is changing, agriculture is changing, every aspect of our life is changing. So we likened, on the Security Commission, we likened artificial intelligence, which is a technology of technologies. It's not a single technology, and it's constantly evolving. But we likened it to electricity. It's going to be so ubiquitous, it's like electricity, and it's going to drive innovation in many, many different aspects of our world. And so that's what I mean by it is already transforming our lives.
Carl Bildt, how would you describe this digital transformation and the impact it will have on global economy and global security?
I like to make the comparison with what happened at the dawn of the industrial age, because I think we are at the beginning of we are there, sort of end of the industrial age and the beginning of the digital age. And if you look at the industrial age, it essentially transformed everything. How much did we know when we were dealing with the first or the second generation of the steam engine, of what was lying 100 years ahead? Very little indeed. But we were beginning to understand that something big was happening. And eventually, of course, the digital age transformed the economies, obviously, transformed societies, transformed politics, and transformed global power relationships in a very fundamental way. And we are at the same. We are at sort of second generation steam age when it comes to sort of the impact of the digital age. And it's going to be as transformative as the industrial transformation. And we are just in the beginning. And it's sort of a lot of 5G, connects everything, blockchain, what is that, what it means for the financial systems, quantum computing, endless possibilities. And as I said, artificial intelligence is all over the place. Yes, yes. And then it interacts also with biomedical sciences and quite a number of things. So, interesting times ahead.
To say the least.
To say the least.
Dr. Griffiths, the Commission has stressed the sense of urgency. Why this need for a quick response or quick act?
The sense of urgency was driven by the fact that our mandate was to look at the national security, artificial intelligence and national security. And as you know, we have a very determined competitor in China, and we know Russia is making ground. We know in Europe you're doing things, and in the United States we felt that it's not enough for us to sit back and expect that it will happen. Most of the development of artificial intelligence occurs in the private sector and in the university sector. The government is still the federal government, very large, very bureaucratic, very slow to change. Even though it has the ability to change, the people move in predictable ways. And so we felt that it was urgent that we really pay serious attention, not just give what we call lip service to it by saying things. We have to do something if the government is going to fulfill its mission of protecting the people. And so actually, as we proceeded through the Commission business, the sense of urgency increased. And we felt that we needed the government to take action, to make some significant changes, that it needed to engage in a certain amount of organizational and cultural change, which can only be driven from the top. So we felt that was very, very important. And the urgency is still there.
Speaking about driven from the top, because the Commission has been working on the request of both the legislative power, the Congress, and the executive power, the White House. According to you, how important is the political leadership when it comes to enable major changes and development in this area?
Well, as I say, in the area of national security, I would say it's essential. But it's not just political leadership. There are leaders in industry and academia and so on, and we came together for the Commission. But that leadership is very important. If you're trying to affect a large organization that officially has responsibility for national security, which is a huge mandate in and of itself, you have to be able to drive it from the top. But it also takes the input of many different voices. And I think that's partly what you're modeling here today, and it's exactly what we're promoting with our recommendations. But the government needs to get itself ready. And if it doesn't move now, it's not going to be ready in 2025 or 2030 or 2040. So the idea is, yeah, it's a huge undertaking, but you have to start somewhere, and you have to start. And you can modify along the way. We feel that our recommendations were simply the first step. So they may seem very bold and sort of forward-looking, but it's just the first step. We're going to have to continue to drive this forward and make appropriate decisions that relate to the kind of environment and the kind of society that we want to have, a democratic.
Carl Bildt, from a Swedish or European point of view, do you see the same political decisiveness? Or do you see any decisiveness needed?
No.
What do you think about that?
No, I don't. We don't have the same awareness as they have in the US. And part of that is driven by the fact that the US, and the Commission is an example of that, sees itself as being threatened as the number one in the world by the Chinese. Yeah. And that's a fairly sort of emotional thing. Emotional is perhaps to exaggerate it, but it's a big thing.
They won't admit it, but it is.
No. It's a big thing. We don't have that particular position, and that's.
Should we have that kind
well,
of
position? We should be aware of the urgency, because we are going to be this is going to transform everything. And what is happening in the US is that one is focusing a lot of resources driven primarily in the public sector by national security, but the private sector as well. Yes. I mean, most of the investment is Google, Amazon, Microsoft, or whatever. I mean, they are bigger than the Pentagon even in spending on these particular things. Where are those money in Europe? If we look at the difference in spending on AI, be that in public sector or private sector, US is ahead, China is catching up, also in the private sector. We should not underestimate that there is a ferociously competitive and competent Chinese private sector apart from the state. And then Europe is lagging behind. I'd have to say that we are not lagging behind in one, or we are fairly good in one aspect, and that's talent. I mean, we do basic research and things like that is done very well in Europe. There are smart people coming out of Chalmers, I have to sort of announce. But the problem is that some of these smart people coming out of Chalmers, they end up in the US. Private sector or even public sector. We don't have the capacity to expand science education sufficiently fast, and we don't have the capital available to make it possible for them to remain in Europe. So we have a huge brain drain from Europe, primarily to the US, from the people that are coming out of Chalmers or KTH or...
What should be done, do you think, to stop this brain drain?
Well, first, awareness, and that goes to political leadership. I mean, the Commission, Eric Schmidt and others, who's been heading it, has been they've been out there in the US public debate, scaring people, saying, hi, the Chinese are coming, we have to do something. And no one has done that in Sweden, or the equivalent of that.
Maybe you could start that.
Well, and then we need to be, we are not bad in Europe in terms of funding for research and development, but we are more development than research. We need to fund our universities and science institutions better. We have become rather good in terms of private capital markets in the last 10 years or something like that. You can see that in the newspapers almost daily. But we are way behind what there is in the US and what there is in China, what there is in Israel, what there is to a certain extent in the UK, not quite. And that is absolutely essential for those that are coming out of Chalmers, to take that particular local example, but it's a fairly...
What would you say is at stake for Sweden or other countries in Europe as a society?
Losing out.
And losing out, where will that take us? What's the grim vision?
Well, we are used to, since whatever, some years, to be believed to be a society at the forefront of development, building one of the best societies in the world. There's an element in that. I mean, we're somewhat boastful, but anyhow, it's not entirely untrue. If we are just left in the dust behind, the others are racing ahead, in applications, say in medical sciences or whatever, you can utilize it, absolutely, we can certainly do that. But we should be there creating it, also creating it so that it's, and that's together with Americans, by the way, so that it's in conformity with the sort of values that we have. We are sort of, as Peter said, we are Democrats. We have sort of fairly human-centric values in European societies. And then it's a question also of shaping scientific and technological development in accordance with those values. And if we let that disappear, there will be consequences.
What do you say, José-Marie?
I was going to say, could I jump in? I think
Yes.
your brain drain is our strategic intent.
Yeah, I know.
In all fairness, I mean, we do believe immigration is part of the strength that the United States has, although recently it hasn't been so good. It's been pushing people away. But I think actually the pandemic has shown us we can work from anywhere. The world has shrunk geographically. And I'm wondering, we talk about working together and coalitions, and I wonder particularly perhaps on the basic research end, which is expensive to invest in, perhaps we could find more collaborations. I know that the United States has signed a bilateral agreement with the UK. They've signed a bilateral research agreement with Australia. Maybe we should sign a bilateral agreement with Sweden. It just seems to me that way we can leverage the talent that exists.
Because talent is a big challenge.
Oh, it's huge.
And as you both mentioned, talent tends to end up in the private sector. So from your perspective, how should you attract talent to take on the challenges of the society? Less paid, not as good lunches.
It's hard. I mean, talent is critical. Everything we did on the Commission came back to talent. If we don't have the talent and sufficiently developed talent, we can't do anything else. But encouraging people to work in the public sector is not as difficult as you might think. All of the work that's going on in artificial intelligence occurs in 5 cities in the United States. Seattle, San Francisco, San Jose, San Diego. Notice a similarity there, not only the initial S, but California and Washington State on the West Coast, and Boston. The rest of the country is sort of a desert as far as AI innovation and companies are concerned. So we find that people who live in other parts of the country, who like the lifestyle of other parts of the country, they like the rural areas and the small cities, are quite willing to work for government, whether it's the federal government or state or local. And people are attracted by the challenges. Offer people a challenge, offer them an ability to have a sort of a fairly efficient hiring process, offer them access to the latest tools and technologies, and they will be very happy. We don't have that. Our federal government is too bureaucratic. It takes too long to hire people. People have offers from 3 companies by the time they've even been spoken to by the federal government. So it's not just about the higher salaries. In fact, the salaries are high because one company is competing with another company, is competing with another company. So I do think the challenge is there, but I think some of our recommendations address ways of reaching out and pulling in talent from the private sector on a part-time basis, which people are quite willing to do, bringing them into government for periods of time through a National Digital Reserve Corps.
It was something like the military work, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
So how would this work? What is the idea?
If you're in the reserves, you work up order of magnitude 40 days a year. You have your job, your employer is for the most part, required to let you go do your business with the government. You can go in for periods at a time, so you might be doing education, you might be doing software development, you might be solving specific problems. And what we've done is we've made recommendations that would strengthen the government's ability to reach out and create this reserve corps. We also wanted the government to reach out and develop better relationships with the university sector, not just in the research side, but in having the professors understand the challenges that exist in government, having those professors bring their students along, creating opportunities for students to do internships in the government in their summers, for example, so that they have an understanding of some of these critical needs. But if you don't give them the best tools and technology, then they're not going to go, because they want to go where the big data sets are, where the latest things are happening. So it's a joint effort, and it has to come from both sides, I think, to make it work.
And what does the government have to do concretely? What do you have? What kind of initiatives?
Well, we need to, we made recommendations that human resources personnel need to understand the technology environment and work with subject matter experts in the hiring process. So rather than go the normal way, there are special pieces of legislation that allow you to hire quickly and at higher salaries for critical areas. It works very well in the cybersecurity area. Now they need to expand it to artificial intelligence, software development, data science, etc. As a whole range of things. We've doubled the number of scholarships for students. They get a full ride to university, but for every year that they're given money, they have to provide a year of service back. So that's another way that we can get people into public service.
Speaking about knowledge, would you say, Carl, at the general level, does the political leaders in Sweden and Europe understand the multitude of this change?
You know what I'm going to answer.
I know. We haven't talked about this. It's good to see like we have rehearsed, but we haven't.
And I see Peter Eriksson down there and Cecilia Malmström down there, being in government. So I think you would agree. We are not up to speed on these issues. You said from the US perspective that the federal or the local or the governments, they are fairly slow. That applies to every sort of bureaucracy of this sort. We have, of course, isolated elements in Sweden that are fairly up to speed in what we have of security institutions. There are some of them that are top class word, but there are rather few. And then we have in the private sector, of course, a couple of sort of edge institutions as well. But overall, we are weak, and we are weak in the awareness of these particular issues. I looked. I'm not going to do any politics, but I noticed that sort of the proposal from the government on research and development program or research policy for the next few years. I mean, AI comes fairly low down on the order of priorities of what they want to do. There are things that are much higher up on that. And that, I think, is a mistake. Because if we are not there with the awareness and the competence and the ability on the AI, we risk losing out on all of the other aspects as well, because AI is going to influence everything. So it should be really on the top of the agenda.
There's been a discussion from a European level, the European AI Act, and some people say that it's focusing too much on ethics and civil rights, and it's sort of going to halter the innovation. Is that a fair description?
Well, it's fair to some extent, and to some extent that could be justified, because some regulation is necessary, no question about that. But we should not fool ourselves. You can't regulate yourself to the top. You need to innovate yourself to the top. And if you innovate yourself to the top, then you can start to regulate. I mean, the US, they say innovation first and regulation then. Europeans say regulation first, and then comes innovation. I tend to be slightly more on the US approach to this. I'm not saying that we Europeans are wrong in regulating, because there are ethical and other issues that are fairly important here.
One could argue that maybe Europe will take on the role as a sort of conscience and lead the way and set the standard.
Well, yeah, but it's very difficult to regulate something that you don't know what it is. Because then sometimes, because it might be that development goes in another direction and you learn things that you were not aware of, and you've done a regulation that stops you. So I think there's a danger, that balance, I think, between regulation and innovation, we need to tilt in Europe towards the innovation side, to make us more innovative and more aware of these, without saying that there shouldn't be any regulation. There has to be.
We're going to get back to this subject later on, where we focus on civil rights. But just to wrap this up, if you're looking at the future, what worries you, and what gives you a sense of hope, looking at this digital transformation and implementing AI?
Well, I think what I worry about is the abuse of power over personal information, and the abuse leading to what I see as fragmentation of society, and really what I call extreme polarization. We're already seeing it in our society. So that worries me, and that will continue because a lot of people have no understanding that that's really going on. What gives me hope is the tremendous potential that AI can offer to quality of life generally, and even to length of life as well.
What would you say?
Well, I'm much more hopeful. I mean, I look at the positive aspects of it, but of course it can be misused. And we have to be careful on sort of ethnic bias and all of those issues that arise, and be able to sort of regulate when that is necessary. And then regulate, you have to do that in a European context, or preferably in a global or Atlantic, because I mean you can't have regulation just for Gothenburg or Sweden or other small places in the world. It has to be within a wider framework. So, but what we need to do now on the European side is to raise awareness of the potential of the transformation that is ahead of us, the good aspect of it, and be far better at innovation and creating an innovation culture and climate in our European economies. I'm not saying it's all bad, but it has up several notches in order to start catching up with Americans, in order to be able to cooperate with Americans, and handle as you need to handle perhaps the Chinese or the Russians or whoever else might be out there, the Danes or whatever.
Thank you so much, José-Marie Griffiths,
thank you.
and thank you, Carl Bildt. José-Marie, we're
Thank
going
you.
to talk again a little later on.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.